As a working professional artist, it can be difficult to find a healthy balance between productive work and work that you're really, truly proud of. I love what I do, and I feel so lucky that I can support myself by designing fan-made Pokemon and sharing those designs with a community of like-minded peers. There are times, though, where I wish I could just take a minute and slow down, really put time into a design, rather than just crank out a ton of videos in order to meet a self-imposed deadline. Well, it turns out that a big pro of being a working professional artist is that I get to make my own schedule. And for the first time in a long time, I spent well over 60 hours designing just one fake Pokemon design. My boss didn't mind. He even let me watch TV while I was working. We're back, guys. Welcome to Subjectively, the channel where we discuss, create, and enjoy the art of character design. My name is Jack, and today's is a very special video. We're still going to be focusing on the Mazah region, but the structure of this video will be a little bit different from the ones you're used to. I want to talk to you about the value of an involved and meticulous concept development process, how important it is to slow down and really put thought into a design so that you're left satisfied and proud of what you created. The format of this video will reflect those themes. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what makes a good legendary Pokemon design, and how I was able to come to a conclusive look for the third member of Mazah Region's legendary trio. Before we begin, I want to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, and a special shout out to Rose, our super subjectivist supporter. If you're interested in helping our channel grow, consider becoming a Subjectively patron. More information about this and other ways you can support the channel at the end of the video. Art is hard, and drawing can be frustrating. Even people like me who do this for a living and love it find themselves in situations where they'd rather just delete their Procreate file, throw their iPad in the trash, and play Minecraft for 6 hours. Why is it that even though you know you enjoy what you're doing, you still find it so hard to finish a piece of art that you're really happy with? Well, it's probably because you care so much about it. You want to make something that you can be proud of, something that you can show to other people and say, look, I made this. Isn't it great? Especially in this day and age, when a social media presence is so crucial to a developing artist, there's a lot of pressure to be able to pump out a high quantity of high quality work to promote yourself and your business. After all, if you're watching this video, it means you're interested in a field of artwork that is dictated by what your audience wants to see. Pokemon designs, at the end of the day, are a product. Yes, they're art, but they're art that's been designed to be consumed by an audience. Something to get people excited, to get them inspired, and yes, the ugly truth that no one wants to admit, they're designed to make you buy things. Is this evil? No. Is it wrong? Certainly not. Does it impact the way we perceive our own artwork? Absolutely. A friend of mine, Umbreon Libris, made an incredibly interesting video exploring the culture surrounding Fakemon artwork. Specifically, he talks about how artists of all ages and skill levels are held to the same professional standards set by a decades-old AAA video game company. Is it necessary to render a fan-made Pokemon design in the same official style as Ken Sugimori or James Turner? No. And yet, the internet expects it. At the end of the day, people are conditioned to see this particular genre of character design rendered in a very specific way, and it's hard for a lot of fans to separate their expectations from the artistic vision of whoever's work they're consuming. Even now, I'm sure some of you are considering scrubbing through this part of the video to get to the part where I start drawing Pokemon. Others may have already done so. Trust me though, this is all relevant to the main topic of today's video. It's now been over 2 years since I first started making Fakemon on this channel, and like anyone who works on the same projects for months on end, I've learned a lot about this particular niche of character design. How to sketch in more three-dimensional ways, how to convey value with two-tone shading, how to focus a viewer's eye using both color and shape, and so many other valuable skills that not only apply to drawing Pokemon, but to almost every other field of visual design. One skill that I haven't quite yet honed is the ability to take my time with a project. When the Mazah Region videos first started getting popular, I felt this compulsion to make as many videos as I could in as short a time as possible. Coming up with new ideas for Pokemon was easy and fun. I didn't give too much thought to the designs and often shared them with you, the audience, after just 1 or 2 passes. Now, if you're a longtime fan of the channel, you know that even though I released these designs quickly, I wasn't always happy with the work I put out. Almost 50% of the Pokemon designs I did for the Mazah region were either tweaked, redesigned, or completely scrapped. This is because, over time, my skills developed and my understanding of the medium improved. Once I was able to step away from the design and really think about every aspect of it, the concept, the inspiration, the colors, the shapes, the personality, I could revisit the design and improve on aspects of it that I had overlooked in my first rendition. As I continued to develop my skills, I realized that instead of moving quickly and finishing a design in as little time as possible, then waiting 6 months and redesigning the whole thing, it might be worthwhile to just spend more time in the concept art stage and really put a good deal of thought into the design before I release it, even if that means the channel's upload schedule gets a little bit more sparse. I would say that's what I did with the design I'm about to show you, but it's not entirely true. I started working on this Fakemon way back at the beginning of August. It was the illustration I did for the final free day prompt of Smogust 2022, a challenge that is sort of the antithesis of the mindset that I've been discussing thus far. Consequently, I didn't spend nearly as much time on the first draft of this Pokemon as I knew I should, but I also knew that what I shared with you would not be the final iteration of its design. And so, in the spirit of taking things slowly, I won't insist that we not waste any more time, and instead gently and elegantly transition into the process segment of this video. We'll be looking at the time-lapse footage of my illustration, which I did using my iPad and the app Procreate. We'll start by revisiting my original design, the one I shared with you back in August. I explained in that video how this Pokemon, Illurimanda, would complete the conceptual trifecta of modernity versus tradition. Hilarmos, the symbol of tradition, is reptilian in its design and behaviors. A reptile is born as a miniature version of its adult form. Not much changes from the moment they hatch till they reach adulthood aside from their size. Maripome, the symbol of modernity, is far more insectoid. Insects are laid as eggs, hatch as larvae, and most insects undergo a process of metamorphosis from larva to adult, wherein they completely change shape. This dichotomy between the two classes and their life cycles lended a strong visual aid to the competing themes of the Mazah region. While a typical reptile and a typical insect may not seem to have much in common, visually at least, they do have a physical trait that they share: molting, shedding an old skin so that they can grow, be it just in size or by completely changing their body plan. This was the unifying factor I wanted to use to inspire my visuals for Illurimanda, the third member of the legendary trio. It would also serve as a conceptual middle ground between the themes of modernity versus tradition. The base concept for the design was a Pokemon that had, at one point, looked entirely different. After shedding its skin, it completely changed, and the humans who witnessed it in its new form were awestruck by its beauty. Some who saw it claimed that the shed skin it wore on its body made it more beautiful than any other Pokemon in existence. Others insist that, while it is beautiful, there was potential for it to become even more beautiful if it cast away its old skin and shed again, revealing a newer, even more splendid form. Tradition versus modernity. Consistency versus change. This Pokemon is a metaphor for how different people view the world. Some people believe that things are good the way they are, while others aspire to change things for the better. In order to exemplify these themes in the design, I made a list of all of the visual features I thought it would be important to include. The character needed to be hidden underneath a shed skin in some capacity. Not completely hidden, but rather wearing the skin as an accessory. This way, most of the design was influenced by the shed skin rather than the Pokemon itself. It needed to look elegant. Beauty is not an easy thing to capture in an objective sense. As they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and many different people find many different things to be beautiful. However, I thought that a traditional depiction of beauty would be appropriate for this design, as the intent behind the character was not to force an audience to question the meaning of the word. Therefore, I wanted it to look light, fluid, delicate, and colorful. These are not the only traits that can be attributed to the word beauty, but they are some of the more common ones. it needed to look related to the other two legendaries. This wasn't as crucial as I initially thought. In some games, legendary trios have more visual unity to them. In others, the story allows for more deviation in the design of the third member, as they play the role of antagonist to the first two, rather than as a final member of their group. Ilorimonda represents a middle ground between the two concepts of modernity and tradition, but it doesn't really play a role in the story of Maripome and Hilarmos. Although I did consider including the fashion element of its design as a potential point of origin for the earrings that control the other two legendaries. Now, in my original design, I wasn't thinking about this list all too carefully. My goal was to get out a rough idea in time for the Smoggest video, and I inevitably ended up rushing through a lot of the process just so I had something finished to show you guys. What I ended up with wasn't a terrible start, but I knew that it would need to be changed. For starters, I wasn't happy with the colors. My main issue was that there was no strong accent color, something to draw the viewer's eye to important parts of the design. Another thing that bothered me about this design was just how bulky it was. Even though most of its design was made up of the light, semi-transparent shed skin, the shapes of the skin were all very bulky and blocky. It made the silhouette much more chunky than what I wanted. Probably the largest issue was one that I wasn't really aware of at the time I designed Ilorimonda. Too much of it was showing. The more I looked at the design, the more I thought that its shed skin should cover up its key features like its face, arms, and legs. Considering all the feedback I got from you guys, all the changes I knew I wanted to make, and how significant this particular Pokemon was to the main story, I decided that it was worth my time to really sit down and focus on redesigning it until I was 100% happy with it. Or at least close to 100%. Let's talk a little bit about what goes into a strong legendary Pokemon design. I'm sure that all of you watching this have differing opinions in regards to what your favorite legendary is, and why you like it the best. And while each legendary Pokemon over the many generations of the franchise are dramatically different from one another, they do all include elements of design that make them stand out as legendary Pokemon. For example, if I showed you Fearow and Ho-Oh, two Pokemon that look somewhat similar, you'd probably guess that Ho-Oh was the legendary, even if you'd never seen either design before. The first thing that tipped you off was probably the colors. At the time when these games were created, the technology used to generate images of Pokemon in-game was very limited, and most Pokemon had very limited color palettes in order to accommodate for this restriction. Fearow is almost entirely brown, with a single accent color of red on its crest. Ho-Oh, on the other hand, has white, green, red, yellow, and blue in its color palette. While this might not be a full rainbow, it was unheard of at the time for a Pokemon to have this many colors in its design. And it makes it feel special. Let's take a look at a more modern example. Necrozma, in its default form, is almost entirely black. But just by looking at it, we can tell that there's something special about this Pokemon. In fact, its lack of colors is what makes it stand out in this generation. But there's more to it than what colors it does or doesn't have. Necrozma is an incredibly intricate design, seemingly constructed of several different components that don't quite seem to fit right. It almost implies that there's something larger, something even more legendary waiting underneath that lightless shell. Which, of course, there is. I've talked about over-designing before on this channel. Examples of over-designed characters, when it's appropriate to over-design a character, and how to do it successfully. Legendary Pokemon in the present day pull no punches when it comes to design complexity. The newest legendaries revealed for the upcoming Scarlet and Violet games have so many different design elements that it's almost overstimulating to look at them. And yet, we can still understand clearly what they are and what role they play in their world. An important thing to keep in mind when you're designing a very complex character, like a legendary Pokemon, is how a viewer's eye will move through the design. When you first look at Koraidon, it may appear as one big blur, but its design is very carefully considered so that your eye moves through the character and focuses on key elements without getting lost or confused. Almost every aspect of the design flows up towards the head. The long feathery antennae curl down towards the eyes. The legs and feet are firmly planted on the ground so that your eye has nowhere to move but up, towards the dark gray base of the tail that points to, you guessed it, the head. Color plays a big part in focusing the viewer's eye too. White, red, and blue are everywhere on this design, but only at one single point does the blue touch against a saturated yellow, right in the eye of the Pokemon. All of these design elements allow a viewer to comprehend at an instant the basic body plan of the character, and allows a viewer to explore more subtle details of the design without having to wonder, wait, what am I looking at? These were facets of legendary Pokemon design that I didn't consider enough when I first designed Illyrimonda, and in my second draft I set out to remedy said issues. My primary goal with this Illyrimonda Mark II was to hide more of its design under its shed skin. When I started, I tried reposing it so that it was looking straight at the viewer, as a few of you suggested that I do so. This ended up looking really strange, and I realized that there aren't any Pokemon that look directly at the viewer in their default artwork. Instead, I focused more on the shed skin, and designing it so that it was implied that the Pokemon once looked very different. I wanted the part of the shed skin that was once the head to now serve as a hood for Illyrimonda, and the design started to take on a very Cobra-like look. Though initially I thought I would lose the back legs and keep Illyrimonda's lower half entirely serpentine, a more meditative yoga pose fit its psychic typing surprisingly well. I designed the skin to resemble the head of a much larger Pokemon, with what were once two huge arms, armed with sharp claws, that Illyrimonda now wears as a scarf. I really liked the dichotomy between the character's current look and how it looked before it shed, but there were still a few more problems. The legs folded beneath the body like a monk were too busy and hard to understand. They took the movement from the viewer's eye and rooted it in a place that was not the focus of the design. When I omitted them to once again commit to my no back legs decision, I realized that I needed something in the lower half other than just a naked tail. My final design gave Illyrimonda something like a spiky dress, which I liked in theory, but the execution of this particular design was, again, too bulky. The false eyes on the top of the hood also looked way too much like cat ears, and it kind of made Illyrimonda look like it was wearing a kigurumi rather than the shed skin of some ancient, powerful beast. I stopped here and thought, yeah, I don't like this particular illustration, but I do like aspects of it. I took another crack, this time ensuring that the body was more slender and serpentine. I experimented with different designs for the dress and the hood, but I really struggled to figure out how I could overlap the shed skin and the body without it getting too overcomplicated or distracting. I would save a few of these rough ideas and end up using them in my final design. After several attempts to make my favorite elements of the design worked, I landed on a sketch that I liked, but the rendering needed refinement. The shed skin lay on the body in a very unnatural way, and I decided that it might be worthwhile to design the shed skin separately from the character. Using my old friend, the symmetry tool, I got to work designing the skin as a separate entity. What I ended up creating was something that I actually was really happy with, and I still enjoy looking at it even now. It's a great example of how, even with a limited palette, you can use visual elements like shape and line to draw the viewer's eye through a design with fluidity and intent. I was so happy with this design that I was convinced it would be my final iteration of Illyrimonda. Using this separate illustration of the shed skin as a reference point, I started on what I thought would be the final and most well-conceived design for this Pokemon. But even as I transitioned from my shed skin sketch to this preliminary design, I started losing my enthusiasm. Something about how the elements of Illyrimonda's body overlay with its shed skin was just not working. It was still too bulky. The shed skin hood stifled so much of the movement that I wanted to convey in Illyrimonda's design, and the dress directed the viewer's eye away from the head rather than towards it. This Mark VI design wasn't atrocious, but it wasn't what I pictured this Pokemon to be in my mind. Nevertheless, I was committed to making this design work. This was a problem that I'm sure a lot of you have encountered with your own artwork. It's easy to get stuck on one idea, even if you've proven time and time again that it's just not what you want. Maybe I already knew this when I went in for my 7th rendition of Illyrimonda, because I didn't change much and couldn't even bring myself to include color. Something was just not working about this design, and I was feeling like throwing in the towel altogether. Instead, I took another step back. I decided that even after all of the work I'd done to get to this point, I needed to start with a blank slate. I set my hooded concept aside and thought about which elements of the design I wanted to keep and which things were just dead ends. What I liked was how the character wore the skin. It wasn't armor, it wasn't a weapon, though it could be used as either. It was a part of the character that it didn't want to let go. But more so than that, I wanted the skin to feel like it was hiding something, maybe even restricting the Pokemon. Not in a painful way, but I wanted to be able to convey that from a certain perspective, Ilorimonda's shed skin seemed to be holding it back. I liked the serpentine body. In fact, I wish I could see it more clearly in the previous designs. The way the dress part of the skin shot outwards kind of killed the fluid movement of the body, and I wanted to change that. Lastly, I did like the dress. It just needed to be flowing with the motion of the rest of the body, not against it. With these few things in mind, I said goodbye to the design that I thought I couldn't improve on, and started almost completely from scratch. This time, I used a clever way to keep the scale of the head without losing the movement of the body. Using the shed skin like loose bandages, I wrapped them around its head and neck. This gave the design something like the look of a mummy, and immediately I started to think about asymmetry. We almost never see asymmetrical designs in Pokemon, and whenever you do, it always feels special. Having part of the face of Ilorimonda wrapped in bandage-like skin, while the other half shows the exposed eye and wrappings, demonstrate both sides of the argument about its beauty. One half exhibits the potential for what could come if it shed its skin again. The other half showcases the beauty that the shed skin provides. And because the skin hugs the neck tightly at some points, but hangs loose at others, the slender curve of the Pokemon's body is not lost. Though it wasn't as explicit, in this version of the design, that the shed skin had a face and a mouth, I did want to include an eye hole on one of the wraps of the skin to play up the asymmetry a bit more and to hint at the design of a pre-shed Ilorimonda. For the arms, I decided to keep them hidden, just like the face. Unlike in the previous iterations, the skin wouldn't resemble a second pair of limbs. Instead, I made a cone-like structure of spiraling skin, leading the eye back up to the head of the Pokemon, as this design was already getting busy. The biggest challenge was the lower half, and I needed to find a way to keep the movement of the linework flowing up towards the head. I still liked the spiky dress, but having it point outward like jagged flower petals drew the eye away from the focal point of this design. Instead, I decided to bring back the lower legs and have the dress flow around them. This allowed me to show off both the top surface of the shed skin and the underside, which I would have a lot of fun with in the coloring process. Though I agreed that the purple and yellow color combination worked well, I was hoping to try something new in this version of the design. I went back to my very first draft of Ilorimonda and made its body pink, but to keep that strong contrast in colors, I made its shed skin a pale yellow. The inside of the shed skin though, that's where the fun comes in. Something about all of my previous designs that I resented was the lack of interesting and striking textures. Because part of the beauty of Ilorimonda was the shed skin itself, I wanted at least some parts of it to be noticeably gorgeous. This also gave me opportunities for accent colors that could draw the viewer's eyes where I want them to be. Everything about this new design, from the movement of the figure to the intricate elegance of its shed skin, is leagues better than my initial design. I'm proud of a lot of the Pokemon that I've made for this region, but Ilorimonda has to be one of my new favorites. And the amount of work I put into finishing it proves just how important taking a little extra time with your art can be. Ilorimonda, the resplendent Pokemon. Ancient myth has it that Ilorimonda once looked entirely different. It kept a single form for millennia until humans first inhabited the Mazah region. Upon seeing the splendor of civilization, Ilorimonda is said to have shed its skin, completely changing its appearance. People who have claimed to encounter this legendary Pokemon speak of its unparalleled beauty, but some believe that its true potential remains undiscovered. Some say that it can never be more beautiful than it is today, while others argue that it yearns to shed its skin once again to achieve its full majesty. It's funny, I spent this whole video singing the praises of an extensive design process, and yet there are still a handful of Pokemon designs that I've done for the Mazah region in one pass that I love and are just as proud of as I am of Ilorimonda. Sometimes the easiest solution is the best one, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. or legendary dragon Pokemon. But if you ever find yourself stuck in a rut, feeling unsatisfied with your work, don't be afraid to take it slowly. Even if your career depends on quick turnarounds for deadlines, even if your professor tells you it's due next week, the quality of what you make will suffer if you don't give yourself enough time to consider, conceptualize, and execute. Trust me, try it at least once. It will make a difference. I promise you. And that's all for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you want to help us out even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. We have awesome monthly rewards like unique prints, and even a tier where we give detailed character design lessons. Any amount helps, and we want to extend our sincerest appreciation to our current supporters. Link in the description. Thanks for watching, everyone. We will see you all in the next video.